Welcome to EAI interview. My name is Sonyal. I am the president of East Asia Institute and Yonsei University professor. Today's interview features Dr. Victor Cha, my old friend, who is Senior Vice President for Asia and Korea Chair at CSIS. And he's also a Distinguished University Professor and Professor of Government at Georgetown University. He is the leading expert on Korean affairs and U.S. policy toward Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much for coming again. I think we did it on the same format in October 2022.
Yes.
So it's been a year and 3-4 months. We are at a very exciting moment as both countries are election campaigning, and North Korea is also making quite big move in several ways. So we will discuss all this. Let us begin with North Korea. As you know, North Korea is making lots of military provocations, missile tests, and also launched military reconnaissance satellite and artillery shows. So now we are witnessing the increasing level of military tensions between the two. And at the same time, Kim Jong-un has made several important remarks, particularly about the nature of the inter-Korean relations. He renounced the term reunification as a stated goal, and he doesn't use the term 민족 recently. So he transformed the bilateral relations into a more hostile state-to-state relationship. So with all this, how do you interpret this move, and what do we expect from North Korea this year, 2024?
Yes. Well, first, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be with your viewers. I think, unfortunately, that 2024 is going to be a difficult year. I think we'll see heightened North Korean military provocations, missile demonstrations, perhaps even seventh nuclear test in 2024. I think there's several reasons for that. The first, as we have written in a recent CSIS report, historically North Korea has increased its level of provocations during U.S. election years, presidential elections and congressional elections. In fact, if you look at the past 10 presidential elections and U.S. congressional elections, the average annual number of provocations during election years under Kim Jong-un versus Kim Jong-il, it has gone up over 3 times. We've already seen a lot of missile demonstrations thus far, still very early on in the year. Second, as you know, we have annual U.S. ROK military maneuver exercises in the first quarter of 2024 that will likely also be accompanied with the first unique U.S.-Japan ROK trilateral military exercise. And that will also give a pretext for North Korea to be more belligerent. So I think both of these things mean that we will see more provocations from North Korea in 2024, unfortunately. In addition to that, I think what he is doing with South Korea in terms of taking away the goal of reunification is an active decoupling of inter-Korean relations. It's not the first time that North Korea has done this. As you remember, they blew up the Inter-Korean Family Reunification Center in the DMZ in the past. This is an active decoupling from South Korea of all the institutions of inter-Korean dialogue. It's not a good sign. Doesn't mean it couldn't be reconstituted in the future, right? It doesn't rule that possibility out. So I think those actions also comport with this general trend, I think, in 2024, where you have elections, the United States has elections, and North Korea will tend to be more active in that period because they believe that they can somehow influence either of these or both of these elections.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think that North Korea might attempt a lethal military provocation?
I do not think North Korea has made a strategic decision to go to war. I certainly believe that they will increase the level of provocations, including potentially more direct conventional provocations with South Korea in the waters or on the border around the Korean Peninsula, as they've done in the past. But at the same time, I think that those would be, as North Korea has done in the past, very limited and very tactical, rather than being interpreted as the first salvo in a war.
Well, I remember you mentioned that successful launch of military reconnaissance satellite was a direct result of assistance from Russia. So, Kim Jong-un has outlined Pyongyang's strategy for 2024, emphasizing strengthening relationship with Russia, China, and socialist countries. Do you see, that move will have consequences on bilateral relationships?
I think this is probably the most significant development when we think about North Korea in recent decades. If you think about it, North Korea was in a very difficult position after the failure of the summit diplomacy with Trump and then going into a 3-year COVID lockdown. They emerged from that and all of a sudden they have this new relationship with Russia. Historically, North Korea has always been the one in sort of the supplicant position when it came to the Soviet Union and Russia, asking for food and fuel, asking for security guarantees, asking for debt relief. We're now in a situation where Russia needs North Korea to provide all of this ammunition for the war in Ukraine. And this actually puts North Korea in a very good position. They are able to not only get food and fuel from Russia, but I worry that they are getting sensitive military technology as well. Again, historically, Russia has been, and the Soviet Union has been fairly stingy when it comes to providing military technology to North Korea. But that was at a time when the Soviet Union or Russia didn't really need North Korea. Right now, Putin is in the fight of his life. He's fighting for his life, literally, in Ukraine. And that, I think, makes him much more willing to provide things to North Korea in terms of military technology that Russia normally might not do. I am very worried by the fact that Kim Jong-un recently was reported to have reviewed the project to develop a nuclear submarine. This, to me, is a clear indication that they are looking for Russian help in terms of nuclear submarine technology, in terms of military satellite technology, and also probably ICBM technology as well. So this is a very significant development. It has obviously led to a closer tie between the DPRK and Russia, but this also has a rebound effect on China in the sense that China is fond of saying they have very little influence on North Korea, but at the same time, they jealously guard their influence over North Korea. So if they see an improved relationship between DPRK and Russia, you know China's going to try harder to engage North Korea as well. After the failure of the summit in Hanoi between Trump and Kim Jong-un, I would predict that as soon as Putin goes to Pyongyang, and it looks like after Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee's visit to Moscow, they're setting up a visit by Putin to come to Pyongyang, I would imagine that Xi Jinping will start meeting with Kim Jong-un again. So this is both a cohering of the trilateral relationship between China, DPRK, and Russia, and it is, again, another case of North Korea being able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. They have been able to take what was a very bad situation after this big gambit with the United States and then the COVID lockdown, and to turn that into a position where they occupy now a pivot between Russia and China.
There's a the increasing concern, traditional Northern Triangle versus Southern Triangle. We saw that in, the Cold War years. So it's going to be a revival of those, two triangles competing with each other. And if that happens, then, current sanction regimes against North Korea will be significantly loosened, and, that changes a lot.
I agree with that entirely. And I think, like you said, we have these configurations now very similar to the Cold War, where you have China, DPRK, Russia, and USROK, Japan. China used to refer to USROK, Japan as the Iron Triangle, designed to contain China. But in addition to that, this has broader global ramifications because, as you say, the fact that China and Russia are no longer willing to work with the West in the UN Security Council to deal with North Korea really reflects negatively on the future of the UN Security Council as a global governance institution. So what is happening here, I think, is not only impacting the United States and Korea, it's impacting global governance in the sense that we can't go to the UN Security Council anymore for these sorts of issues as long as China and Russia oppose it.
Right. Let's move to election, U.S. presidential election. Everybody believes that the U.S. Presidential election is the most consequential election among many elections occurring this year. We can't predict the winner, but we can anticipate and prepare for foreign policy directions if Trump wins. Now, what's your thought if Trump wins on North Korea policy?
Sure. Well, first I would agree about democratic backsliding in the international system today, but this year we'll see more people voting for their leadership in Asia than anywhere else in the world, which is really an astounding fact. We don't know the outcome of the U.S. election. It is most likely going to be a rematch of Donald Trump versus the incumbent Joe Biden. Again, nobody can predict how that will turn out. It'll probably come down to only thousands of votes in 5 swing states in the United States. So it's going to be very close. What does it mean for policy towards North Korea if Donald Trump wins? I think Trump will be inclined to rekindle his personal relationship with Kim Jong-un. I think that's something that we can count on. I think we can also expect that if he were to win, it will be very similar to 2017 in the sense that it will be coming on the heels of a year of very difficult relations with North Korea. As we talked about, 2024 is not going to be an easy year with North Korea. So it will become a front burner issue for him, like it was when he took office in 2017, and he will need to do something to deal with it. I think his response would be, again, to try to establish the personal relationship with Kim Jong-un. But I think the other thing is that while he may still talk about denuclearization, there may be an effort really to try to reduce the level of provocations in return for some sort of sanctions lifting. And effort to try to regulate, modulate belligerent North Korean behavior. So in DC circles, this is what is sometimes known as threat reduction and arms control with North Korea rather than denuclearization. I'm not saying for certain that's the path he'll choose, but I do think that given the way after the Singapore summit he openly declared the North Korean problem was solved, he will also openly declare the same thing if he manages to get Kim to stop doing the long-range missile testing and default to basically a threat reduction and arms control policy, which in name would be denuclearization, but de facto might be accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapon state.
That'll put, ROK government in very difficult position.
Yes, I think it will put the ROK government in a difficult position. I think it will put other governments and allies of the United States in a difficult position. Trump would probably not continue the level of military exercising that we're seeing now between the U.S. and the ROK and trilaterally with Japan, largely because he thinks that exercising is very expensive and he doesn't want to spend that kind of money. So all of the work that's been done on the Washington Declaration, on the Nuclear Consultative Group, these things would have to be assessed again under a Trump administration, whether they would continue those things. Again, we're not predicting here because we don't really know, but these are the things that concern me.
What about the Camp David?
I would imagine his advisors on Asia would recommend that he continue to do these. He might continue to do them in form. But of course, what is important about Camp David is not the meeting, but the exercising, the agreement to intelligence sharing, the agreement to work together on ballistic missile defense. These are the substance that really matters. And it's not clear to me that President Trump in a second term would value those things as much as the Biden administration values them. The Biden administration, we know, really does value those things, and they give a great deal of credit to South Korea and Japan for making those things happen.
Two the issues if Trump wins. One is burden sharing issues that we have gone through it. The other one is trade relations. For trade, that now United States is the largest export market since June last year, and number one trade surplus country for Korea. But if Trump became a president, he will look at this number. And then, it's going to be a big trade issues between the two. And Korea will be in difficult position because your largest, export market, China, right, is a really competitive relationship. And Korea actually, figuring trade deficit last year for the first time since diplomatic rapprochement. So, from China and also from the United States, South Korea will be facing a very difficult situation. Right?
I think there will be some consistency between Trump and Biden administration on trade policy, particularly when it comes to things like supply chain protection, de-risking. I think many of these things, in fact, actually had their beginning in the first Trump administration with things like the Clean Network, the Blue Dot Network, these sorts of things. And then, of course, they were expanded under the Biden administration. And I think Trump will continue those things. On legislation like the IRA, the CHIPS Act, but at the same time, I think there might be less willingness by the Trump administration to listen to the complaints of allies, as the Biden administration tried to do. I think on the IRA, for example, the Biden administration heard the complaints from Korea and France and really did try to address them. It's not clear to me whether a Trump administration would do the same thing. Also, in terms of trade balances, we know from Trump's first term in office that he doesn't like countries running trade surpluses with the United States. And that in general, he sees allies on the trade side as more adversarial relationships, going back to his experiences in the 1980s, adversarial trade with Japan. And I think he kind of really views the relationship that way. I mean, his main concern with regard to China was really about the merchandise trade deficit. Many other people then brought other issues they didn't like about China to the table as well. But the main thing that motivated Trump was the merchandise trade deficit with China. And that's why we saw the sanctions and things of that nature. So I think we could see those sorts of sanctions come back under a second Trump administration, which again would make for a very uncertain trade picture for allies. On defense burden sharing, again, as viewers will remember, Trump demanded $5 billion from Korea, 5 times what the norm was for Korean burden sharing. Fortunately, an agreement has been made that will last well into the Trump administration. In fact, I think if he were to win again, it would last up until the last year of his administration. So in that sense, I think that might be off the table because an agreement has already been reached. It's entirely possible that Trump would come in and tear up that agreement and start over again, although that would be a pretty dramatic move. But yes, I mean, I would expect consistency there. I think Trump would be asking allies in Asia and Europe to bear more of the burden of defense and to pay a higher cost for U.S. troops in those countries, whether we're talking about NATO or Korea or Japan.
Thank you. Finally, can you give any suggestions to and recommendations to the ROK government after the election?
Well, I guess I would say a few things. The first, of course, is we don't know how this election is going to turn out. So, the South Korean government has to work with the U.S. government that is there, not the one that is not there yet. So, in that sense, they would still have to work very well over the next year with the Biden administration, do as much as they can to institutionalize bilateral aspects of the relationship, whether it's the Washington Declaration, the NCG, or trilateral aspects of the relationship, including the Camp David summits and all of the things that have flowed from the Camp David. Continue to work with the current administration with regard to de-risking. I think these are all things that should be consistent going forward. One of the things we saw in the first Trump administration was the importance of leader-to-leader ties. Trump had a very good relationship with the late Prime Minister Abe. So being able to establish a good personal relationship between President Yoon and President Trump will be very important. My personal view is I think they would get along. I think Trump and Yoon would get along. Both of them are not politicians by training. Trump was a businessman. President Yoon was a prosecutor. So they come to politics from outside of politics, which makes them both political mavericks, if you will. And they might be able to bond over something like that. But that personal relationship will be important to establish early on. If Biden were to be reelected, I think then I think many in this country would be very relieved, as they were when he won the last election. I remember the front pages of every Korean newspaper when Biden was elected president, and they all were breathing sighs of relief, hailing the return to normalcy in the U.S. and U.S. ROK alliance. So I think if Biden were to win, there would all the things that we're doing now would continue going forward, and there would be a lot of consistency, predictability, and reliability in the relationship. But if Trump were to win again, it was kind of a roller coaster ride the first time around, and I don't expect it would be any different the second time around.
Thank you, Victor, for sharing time with the EAI. I think today's discussion is very insightful and very interesting, intriguing. We'll see what happens. Year after, hopefully we meet again, review
Yes.
what we said before.
We can play back the tape.
Right.